people had to say, well, the WNBA fined me for
No! You got fined for episode 1?
Dude, they fined me $1,500. I'm like, what? I'm like, this is just the beginning. I was like, you're kidding. What happens is they email our GM, and she pulls me aside and she goes, come here, Soph, I have to talk to you. And this was in like front of everybody. And I was like, what did I do now? And she just smiled and she goes, hey, they're going to fine you again. They're like,
The WNBA thought they had Sophie Cunningham under control. Hit her with fines, keep her quiet, and move on. Simple, right? Wrong. Because every single fine didn't silence her, it amplified her. What the league saw as punishment turned out to be the exact spark Sophie needed to build something much bigger than basketball. Think about this. In just a few months, 2 fines, totaling only $2,000, transformed her into one of the fastest-growing names in women's sports. Not because of her stat sheet, not because of highlight reels, but because she figured out how to turn league discipline into viral fuel. While other players would have backed down, Sophie turned every fine into momentum, every punishment into a platform, and every controversy into opportunity. And here's what nobody else is talking about. This isn't just Sophie versus the WNBA. This is the blueprint for how players can break free from league control, create their own empires, and flip the power dynamic of professional sports. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind to how it all started. Because once you see the first domino that fell, you'll understand why the league may have accidentally created its own biggest threat. It all started with what should have been a small slap on the wrist, a $500 fine for a TikTok. Sophie had posted a lighthearted roast of referees, syncing her frustration with Sabrina Carpenter lyrics. Funny? Yes. Harmless? Pretty much. But the WNBA didn't think so. They came down with a fine, and most players would have stopped right there. Sophie didn't. Then came the second hit, a $1,500 fine for comments she made on the very first episode of her brand new podcast. She spoke openly about officiating and consistency in the league, something every player talks about privately but never dares to say in public. And just like that, she wasn't just Sophie Cunningham, the basketball player, anymore. She was Sophie Cunningham, the voice, willing to say what everyone else was thinking. But here's where it gets wild. Those 2 fines, a total of just $2,000, didn't push her into silence. They pushed her into the spotlight. Sophie gained more than 1.4 million followers across her platforms in the wake of those punishments. Let me put that into perspective. Companies pay between $1 and $3 per follower in advertising costs. Sophie spent $2,000 in fines and pulled in 1.4 million people. That works out to around 6 cents per follower, a marketing return over 3,000 times more effective than traditional ads. The league thought they were teaching her a lesson. Instead, they handed her the most successful viral marketing campaign women's basketball has ever seen. And that's just the beginning, because once you realized Sophie wasn't just reacting, but actually building something behind the scenes, the entire story takes on a much bigger meaning. Think about the timing here. Brand new podcast, bold, controversial comments, league discipline, headlines everywhere. Within days, her show had a 4.8 out of 5 rating on Apple Podcasts, millions of impressions, and Sophie established herself as more than just another WNBA player. She became an independent media personality, one the league couldn't control. And this is where the real danger begins for the WNBA. Because when players create their own platforms, they're no longer dependent on the league's marketing machine. Sophie bridged 2 worlds overnight: basketball fans looking for authenticity and entertainment audiences who crave unfiltered personalities. That crossover reach is priceless, and it's exactly what the league never saw coming. The fines weren't silencing Sophie, they were fueling her launchpad. And while everyone else thought this was just a rebellious player mouthing off, Sophie was laying the foundation for something much bigger, a multimedia empire completely outside WNBA authority. But here's where the story gets even more explosive, because this wasn't just about clout or followers. Sophie figured out how to flip every punishment into profit, and the numbers prove it. Here's where everything flips, because Sophie Cunningham isn't just gaining followers, she's cashing in. Before her viral breakout, her sponsored content rates hovered around $10,000 per post. Not bad for a solid role player in the WNBA. But after the fines, the controversy, and the wave of attention, those rates doubled to an estimated $20,000 or more. That's not a minor bump. That's life-changing income for someone the league thought they were punishing. And it doesn't stop there. Her jersey sales completely sold out by July. Her TikTok views averaging over 1 million per clip. Brands started lining up, not because she scored more points on the court, but because she scored more influence off it. Sophie has essentially built a marketing engine where every so-called disciplinary action makes her brand stronger, her platform bigger, and her bank account fatter. Think about that for a second. The WNBA is writing her fines like invoices, and she's flipping them into investment capital. What was supposed to be a setback has turned into the most effective growth strategy in the league. And here's the kicker. This isn't just rebellion for rebellion's sake. Sophie is monetizing her authenticity. Fans don't feel like they're watching a corporate-approved spokesperson. They feel like they're watching a real person, saying what everyone else is too afraid to. That connection is worth more than any highlight reel, and brands know it. But as profitable as this has been for Sophie, the real shockwave is what it means for the league itself. Because these viral moments didn't just arrive at random. They landed right in the middle of the biggest contract battle in WNBA history. And that's where things get truly dangerous for league authority. Here's the part that almost nobody's connecting. Sophie Cunningham's viral rise didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at the exact same time as the most explosive collective bargaining negotiations in WNBA history. 80% of players will be free agents in 2025. That means nearly the entire league could reset their contracts all at once. And just weeks before Sophie's podcast launched, the Players' Union rejected the league's first proposal, calling it, quote, a slap in the face. The biggest sticking point? Revenue sharing. Players want a percentage of the league's brand new media rights deal, which could be worth between $2 and $3 billion.
Now, ask yourself, in the middle of those tense negotiations, what's more threatening to the league? A player criticizing referees, or a player proving she can generate independent value that rivals entire franchises? Because that's what Sophie's doing. She's showing that individual players with authentic voices and unfiltered platforms can drive engagement at levels the league itself struggles to match. And listen carefully to Sophie's own words. On her podcast, she said, "I am the only one who says what everyone else is thinking. If you ask our league, they feel the same exact way." That's not just venting, that's organizing. She positioned herself as the voice of the locker room, saying publicly what dozens of players whisper privately. The WNBA treated it as misconduct, but in reality, it looks a lot more like labor activism. And here's the irony. Every fine they hand out only validates her claim that the league wants control more than it wants solutions. This is why the timing matters so much. Sophie isn't just a player with a podcast. She's a symbol of leverage in the middle of a billion-dollar negotiation. And if more players start to realize they can amplify their voices and their value outside of league-approved channels, the balance of power shifts permanently. But here's where the fire really spreads, because Sophie's not just speaking for herself. She's tied her story directly to the league's biggest star, Caitlyn Clark. And that connection might be the most dangerous part of all. If Sophie Cunningham had been out here on her own, maybe the league could have brushed it off. But she isn't. She's linked herself directly to the WNBA's most valuable asset, Caitlyn Clark. Remember that infamous moment when Sophie went head-to-head in an altercation to protect Clark? After the game, Clark reportedly looked at her in the locker room and said one word, "Finally." That's not just a thank you. That's confirmation that Sophie's role as Clark's enforcer is recognized, even appreciated inside the team. And insiders are already whispering that this wasn't some accident of chemistry. Rumors suggest Indiana Fever coach Stephanie White brought Sophie in specifically to play that role, the physical protector for the league's brightest star. Which, if true, makes the league's fines even more ironic. They're punishing the very player they need most to keep Clark safe on the court. But here's where it gets explosive. By tying herself to Caitlyn Clark, Sophie plugged into a multiplier effect. Caitlyn is already the most polarizing and most watched player in the league. Any drama connected to her gets 3 times the engagement. And Sophie's authenticity, her willingness to speak what others won't, means now she's riding the same wave, sometimes even outshining Clark on online attention. That creates a nightmare for the WNBA because you can't quietly discipline the protector of your #1 revenue generator without looking like you're undercutting your own product. Every time Sophie gets fined, the spotlight doesn't just land on her, it drags Caitlyn Clark's name back into the headlines too. And the numbers back it up. Sophie's 1.7 million TikTok followers and 1.1 million Instagram followers represent more reach than entire WNBA franchises. Add in the Clark connection, and she's now positioned as both the league's most controversial player and one of its most essential. Which brings us to the real question. How are fans reacting to all this? Because if you look closely at the online conversation, you'll see Sophie isn't just surviving fines, she's turning them into badges of honor. To really understand how this story exploded, you have to look at the temperature of the online conversation, because the reaction to Sophie's fines isn't what you'd expect from a typical WNBA punishment.
On Reddit, announcement posts about her $1,500 fine didn't sink into obscurity, they spiked with over 150 comments, many of them reframing the punishment as a badge of honor. Instead of, "she crossed the line," fans were saying things like, "finally, someone's willing to say it." That's a complete inversion of the usual disciplinary narrative. Across Twitter and TikTok, the sentiment is split, but split in the most valuable way possible. Some call her reckless, others call her fearless, and the debate itself keeps her name trending. Even when people disagree with her approach, they're engaging with her content, boosting her visibility, and validating her as a central figure in the conversation about the league's future. And here's the key insight. Sophie's not the only one criticizing officiating. Fever coach Stephanie White has called Leah Boston the most unfairly officiated post player in the league. Minnesota's Cheryl Reeve flat out said the 2024 finals were stolen because of bad calls. Angel Reese has publicly demanded officiating reform. Even Commissioner Kathy Engelbert admitted during All-Star Weekend that consistency is a major concern. So when Sophie speaks up, fans don't see it as one player complaining. They see her as the lightning rod for a problem that everybody knows exists, but few are bold enough to say out loud. That's why her fines get reframed, not as discipline, but as proof she's exposing something real. In other words, Sophie Cunningham has turned league punishment into community validation. And when online communities decide you're the truth teller, your influence doesn't just grow, it becomes untouchable. But here's the part that should have league executives sweating. Sophie isn't just going viral by accident. She's running a repeatable formula, one that any other player could copy. And if that happens, the WNBA's entire disciplinary playbook could collapse. Here's what makes Sophie Cunningham's rise so dangerous for the WNBA. It's not just about her. It's about the formula she's perfected, one that any player could copy tomorrow. The pattern is simple, but devastatingly effective. Step 1, make a controversial statement. Step 2, take the inevitable league fine. Step 3, respond defiantly on social media. Step 4, watch your follower count explode. Step 5, cash in with brand partnerships and higher engagement. Then, repeat. Every cycle multiplies itself. A single fine leads to viral clips. Viral clips lead to reaction videos. Reaction videos pull in more fans who had never watched a WNBA game before. And those new fans turn into jersey buyers, podcast listeners, and long-term followers who care more about the personality than the box score. Sophie's TikToks are pulling over 1 million views each, many times outperforming official WNBA content. And here's the kicker. Gen Z, the league's most important growth audience, is rewarding her for being authentic, rebellious, and unfiltered. To them, Sophie isn't a problem child. She's the blueprint of what modern athletes should be. Now imagine what happens if other players start using the same playbook. One star pushes back, gets fined, goes viral. Another follows, then another. Suddenly what the league thought was discipline becomes the fastest growth strategy in women's basketball. Instead of deterring players, fines turn into marketing fuel, a badge that says, "I'm real, I'm not controlled." That's why this isn't just about Sophie Cunningham anymore. It's about whether the WNBA can survive when its own punishment system becomes the launch pad for a player-led media revolution.
And here's where the future gets even more unpredictable. Because if this cycle keeps repeating, the league's old tools of control won't work anymore, which raises the next big question: what happens next? So where does all of this go? If the past few months are any indication, Sophie Cunningham's battle with the league isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. And the ripple effects could reshape the WNBA forever. First, the officiating issue. With coaches, players, and even the commissioner acknowledging inconsistencies, pressure is building for reforms before the 2025 playoffs. That could mean stricter accountability for referees, transparency in calls, or even new training programs. And while those changes might sound small, they would be direct proof that Sophie's criticism had an impact. Every fix the league makes, whether they admit it or not, validates her role as the spark that forced them to act. Second, the player model. If Sophie's formula continues to work, fines leading to followers, followers leading to sponsorships, other athletes will follow her lead. The league's entire disciplinary strategy could collapse once players realize punishment isn't a setback, it's a growth hack. Imagine multiple stars each running their own viral cycles, turning WNBA fines into career upgrades. At that point, the league won't be controlling the narrative anymore. It will be funding it. Third, the negotiations. With billions on the table and new media rights deals, Sophie's independence gives the union something priceless: leverage. She's showing that players don't need to rely solely on league marketing to build their brands. If more players prove they can do the same, the push for revenue sharing and speech protections will only grow louder. And finally, the cultural shift. Sophie has already bridged basketball and entertainment audiences through her podcast and reality TV connections. That opens the door for the WNBA to move beyond just being a sports league and into full-fledged entertainment territory. If, and only if, it can adapt to players holding more control over their voices and their narratives. The next year could decide everything. Either the WNBA doubles down with harsher punishments and risks turning every fine into viral fuel, or it acknowledges the reality of this new power dynamic and starts working with players instead of against them. But one thing's already clear. Sophie Cunningham has proven the old playbook doesn't work anymore, and the league is running out of options. The WNBA thought they were silencing Sophie Cunningham with fines. Instead, they accidentally bankrolled the rise of one of the most powerful, independent voices in women's basketball. Every punishment turned into proof of her point. Every dollar fined became fuel for her empire. And now the question isn't if Sophie will keep pushing the league, it's who follows her blueprint next. Because once players realize they don't need league approval, they don't need sanitized media scripts, and they don't need to stay quiet to keep their careers, the entire balance of power shifts. This isn't just basketball anymore. This is a case study in how authentic voices can dismantle institutional control and win. So here's the challenge for you. Do you think Sophie Cunningham is just one player breaking the rules, or the start of a player-led revolution that will reshape the WNBA forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every one. And if you want to stay ahead of every twist in this power struggle, don't just scroll past.
Tap like so this story reaches more people, and hit subscribe so you're part of the inside circle when the next battle begins. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new era.